Attention citizens, do not be alarmed. We are here to entertain. Prepare yourselves for episode 1 of Comic ReLeet.
Gentlemen.
Hey, everybody.
Inaugural podcast for comics.
Yeah, this is a new podcast idea we came up with because JK here is quite the comic fan. Are you not?
I am. Yeah. I've been around comics for a while. I actually was first exposed to them via a babysitter, probably in the mid-'70s.
Okay.
My mom hired a kid to come watch me one night, and he brought a box of Marvel comics from that era.
Okay.
I'm going to bang my girlfriend, so here's some comics.
That may have been true. I'm not sure.
Get up there.
But it was great. It kind of hooked me in. I do know for a fact the first comic that I ever bought was X-Men, Uncanny X-Men number 123, which came out in April of 1979. Not long after that, I got a mail-in subscription where I was getting Legion of Superheroes delivered to my house on a monthly basis.
Is that different?
You don't get mail subscriptions.
Oh, no. I was saying, you said Uncanny X-Men was the first one, and this was Legion of Doom?
Legion of Superheroes.
Legion of Superheroes.
Legion of Superheroes.
This is a very appropriate first comic for you. This is the introduction of Arcade.
Yes.
Yeah. Arcade is a villain in the X-Men universe.
Oh, boy.
That literally is just arcades.
Yes.
Just
That's what he
arcades?
does. His thing is he just puts you in arcades.
That sounds like a great...
I know.
Well,
subject
he
to.
is a hired killer that designs specially created theme parks of death
Okay.
for his victims.
All right.
So,
I like it.
so those were really my first two that I bought on a regular basis. As I got a little bit older, started coming into money, started discovering comic book stores.
Okay.
That kind of started about a 20 to 30 year obsession with buying comics.
And for y'all that don't know JK, he's been on a couple episodes of the Leetist Podcast. I've known JK for many, many years now, and JK is somewhat of a collector, to say the least. Board games, comics, there's some nerdy stuff. What other collecting type stuff have you?
Blu-rays.
Yeah.
Blu-rays.
I may have a slight. I'm not a hoarder. I don't think.
There's a fine line between collecting and hoarding, and I don't know if we're ever we're always riding that edge.
I think if you can organize your stuff, it's not hoarding.
Oh,
So the idea of this show, more than anything else, is that JK, being the expert that he is, he's going to teach me and Ryan, about comics.
We're gonna
About
learn.
different series, different storylines, some history, that sort of thing. What kind of got us from where we started to where we are today. I mean, over time, we're gonna take some journeys.
do a
Am I
deep
wrong?
dive into this, but Tim, what was your kind of understanding? Like for me personally, I never read comics back in the day. I can't read still today. No, but it was always the cartoons.
Sure,
for us, right?
Well, yeah, I watched the X-Men cartoon.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's about it.
The 90s X-Men. You never did the Spider-Man?
No. Or Iron Man. I know was a show at one point.
Yeah, they did them all, man.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was another one.
They did that. X-Men was I think
Super Friends?
after you do the 90s X-Men, it's really hard to top it though, because that was just so damn good.
The expanded Marvel Universe thing, I did that.
Which one's that?
I don't remember. Wait, I'm talking about the movie.
The movies.
Oh,
Yeah.
the movie MCU. Yeah.
You fell asleep at Black Panther.
That's true, I
mean,
did. But in fairness, I had a lot to drink. So, the thing is, it was just not something I was exposed to that much growing up, okay? I think my brother owned 1 or 2 comics, and I might have opened up a Spawn and Batman comic. They were teaming up in some series crossover.
They did a lot of those. I actually owned one where it was Batman versus Alien.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He fought the alien, and he won.
Needless to say,
won.
there's a lot of topics that could potentially be discussed.
Yeah, I mean,
show.
this thing goes really deep. So, I mean, JK, you are a Sherpa here.
Sherpa.
Well, you guys are younger than me.
Wait, is it Sherpa?
Sherpa.
I've been saying it wrong this whole time,
Why
guys.
didn't anybody tell me?
Why didn't anyone tell me?
You guys are younger than me. By the time you got to the point where you had any interest in comics, could you find them in grocery stores? Did they have spinner racks? What was your really first memory of seeing a comic book?
Boy, I don't think maybe just seeing some in the library.
It was,
you know?
yeah, you would go
But
to.
I would kind of pass by them and go to the zoo books.
No, highlights, man. That was where it was.
Highlights,
Do you remember highlights? Can we talk about the history of highlights? Where you got to
Goofus and Gallant.
Do you remember?
That's right.
Like
Mad
they had
Magazine, that was kind of.
they
did
had
that
this
count?
crafting area in highlights where you get to make stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool. Yeah, Mad Magazine. My comic information came from like when I went to like Border Books or if I went to like any of the bookstores that were in the mall, and I would go down just one of the areas, and there's like a whole bunch of, it was graphic novels and comics, but mostly like had a bunch of comics there, and I would just like pick one up and take a look at it. But the thing with comics is like it just, they either make it so it's very difficult for you to get an idea if you want that comic because they seal it, so you can't really take that out, or you just sit there and you read it and you go, see, there's no point in me owning this because I can read this in like 30 minutes.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm out.
I guess I could see that. It was definitely you should judge this book by its cover, and that is how you decide whether you want
Yeah,
it.
no, you're right. I mean, like comics demand you to judge the comic by its cover because that's how it attracts you to the comic.
There's definitely a little bit more history for me because probably as recently as the past 6 months, JK gave me a bag full of comics and said, "Here, go nuts."
Yeah.
And I opened up probably about 10 of them, I would say. And I think I liked about 3 of them, which probably solidifies the idea that it probably wouldn't have been a good hobby for me growing up because some of the stuff. Oh, so here, I guess the biggest thing is they definitely launched me to the middle of some already pre-established relationships and storylines where I was completely lost. And
that's a problem for the comic industry in general. Most of the characters that are created were created 60 years ago.
Sure.
So how do you jump into that continuity for new readers?
Right, and then that's
been a
not even
recurring
counting
issue.
like the alternate versions of all the ones that exist as well, and some things that might just seem mundane. I don't know what Uncanny X-Men is. Is that different than other X-Men? Yes, that's the answer.
Oh, they're the ones that are uncanny, Tim. Get it right, man. There's no, I mean, like that's the thing. They have to. The beautiful thing about comics is they get to reinvent themselves however they want, whenever they want, and it's a continuation. So you can do a Superman is evil series, and you can do a Superman is not
good.
Too good. Or there was one that again, we're going DC and we're going to probably be focusing on more Marvel, but like there's one that was really interesting where it was what happens if when the Krypton exploded and Superman got sent to Earth, instead of landing where he grew up, he
Kansas.
landed in Gotham. And he got raised by the Bruce Wayne's family.
Oh, tell me that's a thing.
Even better, what if he landed in Russia?
Ooh.
Oh yeah, and that was
there's a great
yeah.
comic series called Superman Red Sun.
That's the one where he's locked up in a cell and they don't have him. Like the sun, he's getting like super. Or is that Flashpoint
That's
Paradox?
Flashpoint. That's
yeah,
Flashpoint.
where they lock him up and then like he has no powers because he's just been locked up for so long.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, comics have the ability to.
I don't know what the you were just talking about.
Comics
so this
have
is
the
definitely
ability
going to be a
to
learning experience for me.
reinvent themselves
Yeah.
in certain ways, and that's what's great about them. But they all have kind of like starting points.
Well, I'm even more excited because I thought you guys had at least some base level knowledge, and it's just not there. So there's so many things.
man,
There's lots of things to learn. There's
Love
lots
it.
of questions to ask, and so without further ado,
Well, I think before.
Ryan, what would your comic book name be?
Oh yeah.
If I'm looking it up online, as I just did, my comic book name, Starhawk.
Oh, Starhawk. I'm kind of wondering if any of these already exist. I'm waiting for JK to like pipe up.
All
and
right,
be like,
JK is Starhawk.
Starhawk is a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
All right. No, Star-Lord is.
Both.
There's a Starhawk?
There's a
Yeah.
Starhawk.
Oh, my God.
He's actually in the MCU. He's played by Sylvester Stallone
Get out of here.
Oh.
And what?
in Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
What? Oh my God. That's
All right,
amazing.
hold on. I'm
Okay.
going to change my name to Night Dark.
Night.
I think you're
Not
safe.
Dark Knight.
I think you're safe.
I'm Night Dark.
Okay, I like it.
I'm not Dark Knight.
Oh, I
I'm
put N-I-G-H-T.
no.
Okay.
I'm Night Dark, not Dark Knight. What do I do? My power consists of not being seen in the dark.
Sure. Okay.
And I am part of a royal family.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I do.
Go on.
You can't see me in the dark.
Okay.
And I am a knight.
Well, then I should probably be the opposite of you
Would you be
and be bright,
bright,
night bright,
light bright?
light bright.
I'm light bright. Now, JK, is light bright a hero?
No.
All right, so
No.
Light Bright. What is your
Captain
Light Bright?
Yep.
Okay, Captain Light Bright.
I have the power to provide hours of entertainment.
as long as your batteries don't run out. As long as my batteries don't run out, I shall provide you light.
Captain
Bright.
Light Bright. Yep. Nope.
Yeah,
I'll
so
take
people can come up to your costume and change what your costume
it. I'd like to go ahead and.
shows.
Oh, that's a great
That's
idea.
a great idea.
And then I'd like to go ahead and trademark that.
Done.
Thank you.
Mine would be I was having a lovely picnic lunch with my wife by the riverside.
It's a terrible name.
Wait,
Well-
is this all
Yes,
the
this is
day?
my origin. This is my origin. Not realizing that river was contaminated with industrial waste from a factory upstream.
Ooh.
So as I sat on the bank, it saturated through the bottom of my pants, making my lower half invulnerable.
Ooh.
Gentlemen, I am hard ass.
Hard ass. Very
hard
nice.
ass.
That's pretty good, actually. So, question. Okay. All right.
Hard
Okay.
ass.
All right.
Were you a general, by the way? Can you be General Hard Ass?
I can be a general.
Yeah, you're a
hard ass.
general.
can
All
be a
right,
general
you're
hard-ass.
commander, and I'm just a guy that goes around in a knight's outfit at night. That's all I do.
So, tell me something. Okay, because that makes me think because you named yourself Hard Ass. Okay. When was it about in comic history where the word ass started getting thrown into comics, and it was okay to put them on the shelves?
Probably in the 90s.
The 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the magical time.
Yeah.
When corruption of the youth
We'll
really.
talk. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that.
Fantastic.
So given that you guys don't have a wealth of knowledge to talk about in comics to draw from, before we get into the main topic, I think we should do some history. We should kind of talk about the roots, where it come from.
Take us
I'm for it.
back, man.
Yeah.
I mean, set the scene.
All the
Where are
way
we?
when you were a boy in
Oh,
1930s.
just
Well, before I was a boy.
Oh,
So comics as they are known today in the pulpy magazine type thing probably got their start in the 30s.
Okay.
Numerous companies, they were cheap to produce, profitable. So there were a lot of different groups that started coming out with them. Most of them in the cartoon, funny animal type of genre.
Okay.
The first superhero comic
Was like Lil Abner? Wasn't that an old comic?
Little Abner's.
Little
yeah.
Abner
Yeah.
sounds. What was an Abner? What is who
he
is
was just a character.
He was just Lil.
Yeah.
He
was
just
Lil-
walked around.
It's actually like an old grown man.
He's just a grown man named
Lil
Lil Abner.
Yeah.
Oh, poor guy, man. That's a terrible thing that happened.
Do you know why I know about Lil Abner? And
No,
I'll tell you real
I
quick.
don't know why you know about
I'll tell
Lil
you why,
Abner.
because they did a live action Lil Abner on the Red Skelton show with Clem Diddlehopper. And
What are
I
you saying?
was-
These are words.
I did not grow up on comics, but I did grow up on old comedians kind of things. Bob Hope
Okay.
and
Yeah.
Abbott and Costello and Red Skelton and Three Stooges. Yeah, there was
Andy
a lot of
Griffith.
that growing up.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I got.
There
Keep
you
going.
go.
Okay. So in April 1938, there was a company called National Allied Publications, and they released a comic called
Need a nap
Action.
after that one.
Yeah, National Allied Publications.
know. What was that?
They released Action Comics #1.
Okay.
And Action Comics #1 featured a brand new character called Superman.
Okay.
I remember.
All
I
right.
remember this.
You could make some arguments, but this is probably the first superhero comic to
Okay.
exist.
Okay.
This
Well,
broke
I
the mold.
mean, what was that other? Wasn't Superman based off another like literary like?
Ubermensch?
No, what's that terrible movie that came out that people hated? It was a Disney movie, and it was like this guy who had powers because he was on a different planet. And God dang, I can't remember
Are you
that.
thinking of John Carter?
John
Warlord?
Carter,
No.
yeah.
No, I don't think he's super powered. I think he's just a dude.
You think he's just a dude?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah.
There has been some discussion when you talk about the first superhero comic that possibly the Phantom is the predecessor. Now, you want to talk bad movies? There was a Phantom with Billy Zane.
Phantom like a motherfucker.
Yeah. So there is some argument that that's actually the first superhero comic, but most people kind of look at Action Comics #1 as being the one that broke the mold.
All right, fair
the
enough.
Phantom was like a radio hero.
Yes.
Yeah.
So were there like, so there were like the farm animal type comics back then, right? And then there was like the superhero. What about like detective, like noir stuff?
You had detectives.
Okay.
You had romance comics.
Okay.
You had horror comics. In the 30s, we're not quite to the war comics yet, but they're coming.
Okay.
They're coming.
Because
we need to put that propaganda in, man.
Yeah. Not long after Action Comics #1, National Allied also published a comic called Detective Comics.
Okay.
And about 20 or so issues into that run, we were introduced to the Batman. So those are really the first big two.
So like in Detective Comics, were they every comic just a different detective showing up as like, my name is Detective.
Yeah, a lot of the comics of that era, even going into the 60s, are anthology books.
Okay.
Where you've got maybe 25, 30 pages of comic, but it's going to be some short, segmented stories in each one featuring different characters.
Okay, all right.
Now,
fair
is
enough.
that how
I'm
we
with
got Dick Tracy?
I think Dick Tracy might have been a newspaper comic.
Ooh.
I think.
That's
you?
I'd
Right,
have to
newspaper
research.
comics.
Hey.
Oh yeah,
There you
I remember
go.
those growing up.
Yeah,
that was
those are-
add that to my comic experience. I always skipped to Red Garfield.
I always thought that Kathy had superpowers in the comics when she cried. She had the power to scream really loud and probably upset her neighbors.
Well, they got that from Superman.
Oh, got you. That's why Superman's motto is act.
That's why it was Action Comics.
Look at that. Full circle.
I'm glad I could put Kathy into this discussion.
Should be no surprise. We've talked about National Allied Publications having both Superman and Batman. That would be the company that would eventually go on to be DC Comics, but they're not there yet.
Okay.
So that was April in 38 was when Superman started. When we look at October of 39, that's when another company called Timely Comics introduced a superhero line. Their first issue was Marvel Comics #1.
Oh, here we go.
And among the characters featured in that anthology series, we have the Human Torch and the Submariner.
Okay.
The Submariner, not to be confused with Aquaman, same kind of powers, but the Submariner has little wings on his feeties.
Correct.
Wow.
He gets to fly with his feet. He's the first mutant you see.
And the Human Torch was
Is that
actually
real? Was he saying real things?
He is actually correct on that.
I'll be damned.
Yeah, he's
you.
considered
Research.
he's considered Marvel's first published mutant.
Okay.
It's
all
the
right.
first time they used mutant as a terminology for what they were, which the Submariner actually doesn't even talk to sea creatures. He's just super strong underwater and can fly.
The creative process of these old comics is pretty, pretty simple.
Well,
there's not many surprises at the very beginning.
it's
Superman, he's stronger than a real man. That was the idea, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Because
when you look at the original Superman, the way he was portrayed through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even in the Superman movies, that's not the way he started. He was a guy that could leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Right.
I mean, he couldn't fly. He didn't have a ridiculous amount of powers. He was just an enhanced man.
We're actually getting near, which is very interesting. We're getting near to a point where Superman is going to be public domain. But the Superman that was published in the Action Comics, that's the one. So the only powers they can have is leap tall buildings in a single bound, faster than the speeding bullet, and what other thing he
Tall
had.
buildings in a single
can't
bound.
fly. He can't fly.
He didn't fly. No.
More powerful than a locomotive.
More powerful than a locomotive. Do you remember anyone talking about locomotives in your lifetime?
Only when referring to Superman and his powers.
The only time I heard the word locomotive was from Superman and his creed of different powers. But with the public domain of Superman becoming available, we may get a Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey type scenario with Superman.
Okay, that sounds like a great idea. We should do that.
Man, yeah, Blood and Honey Superman.
So as we start to ease into the war years,
Warriors?
the World War II kind of happened. Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly, war comics become popular.
Sure.
National Comics, they continue to drive that superhero business. So
Okay.
they've got Superman, Batman. They roll out Green Lantern, The Flash, Green Arrow, the Justice Society,
Do you
Wonder
think they
Woman.
had a thing about green? Like, what was it about green that really like kind of came out? Because there was a lot of green superheroes.
There
That
might have been a surplus of green ink.
honest to God, do you think that's true, or is
I
that
don't
something
know.
that's true? JK,
Yeah, with all the military uniforms they were dying, it was really hard. It was easy for them to come
look,
across.
they just had a surplus of it.
It's possible. I mean, why not? Like, they had to manufacture more
Yeah, you
green dye.
jerk. Look, we just had more green ink than we had what we knew. What do we got? Well, we got a Green Lantern. We got the Green
Can't use
Arrow.
red. We're using that on all the barns, you see.
We got the Green Martian. I don't know.
He's later.
Yeah, we got green.
So National really kind of dominated superhero market of the era.
Okay.
In those comics. Timely stuck with Submariner, stuck with the Human Torch. They also rolled out a character called Captain America
Captain
right around
America.
wartime.
Hell yeah.
But really, through the war years, Timely didn't focus on too heavily on superhero comics. They had others, but they're pretty forgotten. They're pretty generic. Timely still kind of led the charge with war comics, romance, all of the other genres.
Okay.
Now, when you hit the end of the war, a really strange thing happens is that superhero comics kind of fall out of favor.
Okay.
And gradually, Timely starts to pull away from that superhero market. National still has those main characters. So they were kind of dominating that.
How often were these coming out? I mean, these were like
So at a best case scenario, monthly. So
Monthly.
you'd see a comic published on a monthly basis. What you saw with a lot of titles was it would be bi-monthly, where you'd
Okay.
see it come out, January, March.
Were the comics
okay.
like mail? Like did they come in the mail, or did you have to go to the shop or
the five and dime store.
Where did you have to go get your tack back and back tack and
I think
whatever it is
I think in
called?
that area it was seeing them on newsstands.
That's
Ah.
So
newsstands.
that was where you'd
So
find
they were
them.
just sold separately in the newsstands, and you pick it up for a nickel.
Yeah,
And then and then you'd be like, this is gonna be worth a lot of money someday. People love the Submariner.
Yep.
Mariner.
Yep.
Submariner.
Timely Comics, as we start to ease into the 50s, changes their name. They become Atlas Comics.
Okay.
Again, still not really dominating that superhero market. It's more National that's driving that.
I'm sorry. Remind me what Timely was doing at this time. Then, like, what were they? What were they putting out?
So they were like we talked about earlier. They were focused more on the war comics, the horror, the
You said
romance.
even in the '60s they were doing that.
In the 50s.
The '50s.
Yes,
Okay. All
in
right.
the 50s.
What do you think? I mean, out of it in your mind, like what was the most war-driven superhero that came out of that time? Like a superhero that was like, this is the pure
Like the
embodiment
propaganda,
of the
machine.
propaganda.
I think it's got to be Captain America.
You think just
Yeah.
Captain America?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you look at the Captain America movies where you had like, the what is it? RSO shows. What were those called?
Oh, USO.
USO shows.
Speak
Where
of Bob Hope.
where it had Cap on stage punching Hitler in the face.
Sure.
There's a comic book that has Captain America punching Hitler on the face
Nice.
on the cover. So
Okay.
he was definitely
So he's basically the embodiment of the war style comics.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to know like some of the lesser known like war style comic heroes that came out of that, because like that's weird. I mean, like you use like a lot of what is happening in history, which all comics do now, is they take what is happening here and just apply it, in a almost to a parody level.
Yeah.
In the comic. And so it's like, okay, well, what would you do? So like during that time, we're talking, the 50s or so. I mean,
well, during World War II.
we're in two.
Yeah.
Right.
You had the
okay.
Justice Society. Wonder Woman was kind of depicted with a sort of a red, white, and blue costume.
Yeah.
And there were other DC heroes that kind of leaned into the war effort. But when you talk about one that definitely symbolized, the America pride during that era, I think Captain America is the one.
Gotcha. Okay. At this point, were they doing like characters as cosplay kind of thing, or was this just all comic related stuff?
I think it's pretty much just comic related. Like
Okay.
you might see, there was an early Superman TV show.
Okay.
I think there was maybe serials with Batman. So is it possible that kids dressed up and played Batman or Superman? Then yeah,
Sure,
that's possible.
But like before that time, sci-fi was more of the genre that kids were into, right? It like wasn't sci-fi originally was like the main hook for kids, and then all of a sudden the superhero surge came out of that.
Sure.
Sci-fi really hits in the 50s.
You think
That's-
so?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I was way off.
You're a
All
little
right,
early,
So,
you're a little early.
So okay, gotcha.
So by the time we get to the 50s, Atlas as a publisher, they do like 60 titles a month. And again, they're leaning into the whole wide variety of genres, very minimal superhero comics, especially after the war. Once you end the war, Captain America kind of becomes a less of a figurehead. But Atlas runs into trouble. So
Sorry, I got more questions.
Oh,
this is what
okay.
you get. You brought a new.
I'm happy to
You
discussion,
come, you ask.
So Captain America, Superman, was Superman looking like like American hero type thing in the same kind of light that Captain America was? Because I mean, it seems like by the initial development of Superman, he was basically Captain America, right? Just strong, could jump high and beat up things.
yeah, I think Captain America, they definitely lean more into the patriotism.
Okay.
And there aren't. I'm not a big reader of that era of comics. Certainly
fair enough,
that's
fair
going
enough.
before my time. I don't know that there are a lot of Superman goes to war comics.
Okay.
Because he would just win.
That's
Like
actually
if Superman
yeah.
went to war,
It's just unfair.
There's
the
a-
war ends.
There's actually it's kind of interesting. There's a guy we're going to talk about as we get into our first topic, a writer named Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas really focused on a lot of those World War II era characters when he was a writer in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
And he had a book for DC called the All-Star Squadron, and it focused on the war effort and how did superheroes deal with the war. And one of the things that he talked about was that, I'm going to go very meta here. So when and I'm air quoting here, when Jesus died on the cross and was stabbed by one of the Roman soldiers, I'm not a religious guy, I'm going to be reaching here, that spear is known as the Spear of Destiny. And it's a very potent magical item, reportedly sought by Adolf Hitler when he was in his time.
Yeah,
I think
he was after everything, man.
Yeah.
He wanted that Ark of the
I
Covenant.
think it's even
He
referenced
wanted that.
in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Exactly. He wanted all that.
So one of the things that All-Star Squadron touched on was that Superman, while he is vulnerable to kryptonite, lesser known, he's also vulnerable to magic.
Oh.
And it was the Spear of Destiny being held by the Nazis that kept Superman out of the conflict in World War II. That's kind of the way they spun it.
Oh.
Is that a real thing that's maintained? Is Superman allergic to magic?
Yes.
Wow.
But,
I
like-
didn't know that.
DC doesn't. I mean, like, and I don't know too much about DC versus Marvel. Marvel's it's easier to know because they inundate us with like 20 billion movies a year.
Right,
so,
right.
but like DC, I'm not quite sure. Like, there is many heroes that actually have magic versus like different
JK,
elements.
do you have any insight
of-
into the
Like, 'cause,
first
like, there's a
magical
difference-
DC villain or hero?
The first hero was probably Zatara.
Zatara. Yeah, he makes
with
that
a
dirty rice.
Z.
Yes.
That's a girl though.
But it's
isn't it?
Zatarran.
That's Zatanna, which is his
Zatanna.
daughter.
It's a real He-Man, She-Ra kind of thing.
Okay, cool. So, all right, I derailed you a little bit. Where
yeah,
were
good,
we? We were
good.
50s.
We're in the 50s. So Atlas kind of runs into trouble because they have a publishing partner that's called American News. So
Okay.
Atlas makes the books, American News sends them out to the world.
Okay.
And American News runs into financial trouble.
Uh-oh.
So they go bye-bye. Only thing that Atlas can do is go to another publishing arm, which happens to be the one that's handling national periodicals.
Okay.
So imagine Pepsi going to Coke and saying, "Hey, can you help us distribute our sodas?"
Sure.
Coke doesn't have any money in that game. So they did have a handful of titles that national periodicals wanted to continue with. So they basically said, "Yes, we will distribute your titles. You are limited to 8 a month."
So they had to choose 8
Yeah.
heroes.
60 titles down to 8 titles. And so it pretty much meant the end of their superhero line because their superhero line had kind of shifted down in popularity. They stuck with the romance. They stuck with the funny ones. And also in the 50s, the Korean War was starting to break out. So they were starting to see a surge in war comics again, not superheroes.
Okay.
All right.
Let's consider Atlas out of the superhero game. Sci-fi comics started coming in as well. They did introduce one hero called Marvel Boy, which was a traveler from Uranus.
yeah,
He said the word.
That's the butt planet.
Hey, that's the butt planet.
Yep. But again, the 50s heroes created by Atlas, not terribly popular. 1954.
What was what was the most popular hero that you would say came out of that, like that we have today?
Marvel Boy.
Just
Marvel
Marvel Boy.
Boy.
Yeah, that's
All
it.
right.
Marvel Boy. They released a character named Venus, who is kind of like a siren type girl.
Okay.
There's not a lot to write home about
Really?
50s Atlas comics.
It's like basically they were just like,
they shuttered they shuttered the superhero line. They didn't have anything running. Even the Captain America, the Human Torch that they kind of printed in the 40s by Atlas, the Captain America Human Torch and such, they'd walked away from those. They weren't selling enough.
Okay.
They couldn't force it into that roster
Right.
of 8. 1954, we had a big thing that kind of just wrecked the industry. There was a lot of concern on the political side that comic books and the popularity of comic books was starting to affect youth.
Okay.
Oh, it's the old D&D.
Yes. So there was a
cult thing.
book that was released called Seduction of the Innocent
Ooh.
that really took a look at criminal acts by kids and how they were becoming more and more unruly. And it pointed a big finger at comic books and said, "This is the source."
1954. Okay, let's see. This is when boomers were coming back from the war, and we had like a sudden influx of 9 and 10-year-old kids that were just all over the place, running rampant, and so they needed to find something to blame, and they chose to
blame comic books.
they blamed comic
Yeah,
books.
which is, I mean, it's easy to point the finger at the thing you don't get. So you just go, I mean, we do this every, decade or generation
Right.
of things, video games, D&D, like everything gets this blame on it.
I'm with you. Okay, all right. So comic books are blamed.
Yeah.
What happens?
And following the Seduction of the Innocent, there was a group formed called the Comics Code Authority.
Have you read The Seduction of the Innocent?
I have not.
Okay.
Segments of it, just to see where they thought things were going.
Sure.
Crazy.
So it seems pretty typical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. To get a comic book approved, you now had to submit it to the Comics Code Authority. They would review it. They would ask you to edit out any content they didn't like.
It's like an ESRB or like
Yeah.
so do they give it comic ratings? At
Well,
that point?
it's either approved or not.
Or you're not getting it.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
okay,
so
gotcha.
what this did, and again, when we go how archaic did this take comic books, you couldn't reference vampires. You couldn't reference werewolves. You couldn't reference any kind of drugs or smoking. Very, very limited horror influence.
Okay.
Very limited violence. No graphic content whatsoever. So what this did to the industry, all those horror comics that were hugely popular, there was even a whole publisher called EC Comics that focused entirely on horror comics. They're brilliant. Gone.
Gone.
They
Completely.
went out of print
Yeah,
immediately. And it really kind of stymied the companies that were producing comics. What do we do now? Because you've pretty much taken away all of our content. National Periodical took a look at this and said, okay, well, what can we lean back into that's going to be tolerated by the Comics Code Authority? And they went back to superheroes.
Back to superheroes.
And so in 1956,
They embodied, what you were
it's-
supposed to be.
Well,
you
the
know?
patriotic superheroes, but I mean, there had to have been superheroes that were created that still fall under this guise of like, oh yeah, that's crossing a line.
well, I'm going to stop calling it National Periodical. I'm just going to call it DC because that's
Okay.
what it
we've
becomes at
officially
this
hit
point. Yeah.
DC.
Um,
All right.
If you look at their comics of the time, they're not controversial. Their heroes are paragons of virtue. They don't do anything wrong. They always make the right decisions.
Sure.
Superman, even Batman at this time is not the dark Batman that
Right.
you know today. He was
Well,
kind of
Frank Miller didn't get his hands on
Exactly.
it yet.
What
yeah.
about like the villains? Like how, how
the
were
villains never
just-
won. They always got their
Yeah, the
comeuppance.
villain get the comeuppance. You get they probably tame the villains a lot more too. It's like, oh, it's the snitcher. He
Yeah.
snitches on people.
But
Ugh.
when they were like reviewing these comics and stuff like that, right? I mean, they had the same kind of limitations on the villains in there too, as far as content goes, right?
Yeah. You were very limited in what you could portray.
Gotcha.
It's sanitized.
So do
comics.
we have like villains that we know today that were out during this time in the 40s and 50s kind of thing?
Oh
I mean,
yeah, I mean the Joker is an early villain from
Yeah.
Detective
Yeah.
Comics.
Okay.
So he's gone through several different
I mean,
iterations.
and
over
he was just an iteration of what was that movie, the man who smiled or something like that. It was which is just an old 1920s movie that it literally is the Joker,
A Man Who Smiles.
the man who smiled.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. I'm the Joker right now.
No, I'm the Joker. I mean, the Joker literally, I mean, when it was coming out, it was just like a literal Joker. It's like, oh, I do tricks and stuff like that, and I try to foil Batman and his plans, but it's comic.
So what kind of
It's a
plots are we
comic.
talking about here then? Like, what are these villains? What's the Joker up to?
They're
for
pretty
example?
lame. I mean, when we talk, you can kind of draw a line to Snidely Whiplash tying the heroine to the railroad track and hoping
Okay.
the hero doesn't get them. It's pretty bad.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
They're not very dramatic.
And these are
also.
still like pretty short comics too. So it's just
They
like
are, they are.
Joker puts somebody on a train track, Superman saves the day, and or
By
Batman
the way,
saves
this
the day.
is the man who smiled. This is like, yeah, it's 1-to-1, pretty much Joker.
That's
Yep.
pretty epic.
Yep.
Encourage anybody to Google that.
It's actually a really good movie.
So when DC decides to revisit superheroes, they've been publishing Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all through this time. But they kind of looked at some of their other characters. The Flash was the first one. So they basically looked at the Flash they had in the 40s and said, let's modernize this.
So hey, okay, we're gonna talk about Flash for a second. Now that you brought him up,
Sure.
Flash compared to Superman back then, right? Was he just faster than Superman? Do they have anything to do with each other? Or was that crossover that came up later, kind of thing?
There's a crossover later, yeah.
Okay.
But Flash
I mean,
was,
they do
Flash was
race
just
each
speed.
other.
Yeah,
Just
they-
fast.
They
Yeah.
do have an epic race together. But when the Flash came out, that was his power, right? He was super fast.
Always
That
just been a
was
fast
it.
guy. Yeah.
And then they start adding, like all comics do, they start adding powers that are kind of
Okay.
formulaic of it. Like the Flash now can form tornadoes or can literally travel through time.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand the comic
Yeah,
evolution
yeah.
stuff. I'm more curious about like when did these like collaborations between heroes happen? You know
Oh,
what I
that's
mean?
later.
Like
Yeah, that's later.
so like Wonder Woman never interacted with okay, all right.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
jumping
Yeah,
ahead a
we
little
are.
Well, no, I'm just asking. So
No,
at
no.
this point, you're saying this point it wasn't happening.
It doesn't happen very
So
often.
every
Okay.
comic was its own self-contained.
Yeah.
Like there's no universe here.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just this is the world that this comic hero lives in, and it does not live or occupy the same space. as
Pretty
this.
much.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. All right.
So when you look at Flash from the 40s, Flash from the
Every
40s was a
Superman's an island.
yeah.
Every Superman's an island.
Flash from the 40s is a guy named Jay Garrick,
Okay.
who gained his super speed through a chemical accident.
Okay.
Well, they didn't use him. They updated it to Barry Allen, who is a police.
Oh, yeah.
And same deal. He gets his powers by being exposed to chemicals.
Sure.
This is immediately popular,
Okay.
and people go nuts over this new iteration of the
So
Flash.
funny.
Okay.
I used to think growing up that chemicals were going to play a more important role in my life.
Like
Like,
quick-
I was
like
I was going to
quicksand?
get hit by toxic waste
Or the
and
Secret
be
Life
like,
of Alex Mack.
yeah. I can I can turn into a puddle and I can float things with my mind.
That's right.
No, I mean, like, it's always interesting. Like, the go-to was always chemicals. It was either chemicals or you're from another planet. They never really thought more outside of what could possibly happen with someone.
Yep. Following the success of the Flash, DC leaned into Green Lantern, which now, instead of a guy who discovered a mystical Green Lantern lamp while he was off on a journey,
Is that magic?
that's magic.
Okay.
Is
So
it?
the new Green Lantern is now a space cop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of
The
an
Green
intergalactic-
Lantern Corps.
Yeah, exactly. DC would continue to go back and sort of revamp a lot of their heroes from the 40s, and again, immediate success. DC
All right.
is taking off in terms of superhero comics. Fans loved this, but they said, you know what we'd really like? We'd like to see a team up.
Yeah.
Let's put them all
There we go.
together.
They finally.
All
Well,
right.
so, I mean, it's like when you watch all these other movies and you go, I want to see Freddy Krueger fight Jason.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
Sure. Why not?
So in 1960, DC came up with a title called the Justice League of America.
Ooh,
Okay.
there it
And
is.
that was where you
All
really start to
right.
unify all the characters and put them in the same book.
Okay. All right.
It is a massive success.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Oh yeah, I mean, imagine like it's instead of you having to buy individual comics to get everyone's story, you go, oh, they're all in one damn comic.
yeah. So this era of DC, we're now
It's like it's less work for DC at this point. 'cause
You've
it's just like,
streamlined the process.
we'll just put all of our comics into one comic and
I
release
mean-
those monthly instead of 6 comics.
I mean, but you have to think like that had to have been like since that was successful, that had to have been on their mind of like, well, then damn, dude, we can just like do whatever. If the floodgate opens and you can do that, that's probably when
Yeah.
you start getting
Yeah,
all
for
your
sure.
weird,
Yeah.
team ups.
So the comics that came out in the 40s, collectors and fans consider that the golden age of comics.
Okay.
When we look at the late 50s, early 60s, this is called the Silver Age.
The Silver
and DC started the Silver Age. DC is dominant at the start of the Silver Age. They have just comic title.
Marvel
after
still
comic
only
title.
got Marvel Boy.
They're not even Marvel yet. They're just Atlas Comics, and they have a very limited roster of things.
Okay.
But in the early '60s, the guy who was heading up Atlas Comics, he's a guy named Martin Goodman. He's the publisher of Atlas. He's branching off Atlas into all sorts of different companies. They're releasing comics under Leading Magazine Corporation, under Vista Publications, under Mail Publishing Corp, and none of these are superhero comics. He's not doing anything with superheroes. It's all the other genres.
Okay.
But reportedly, he's out golfing, and there happens to be a conversation going on where he's overhearing discussion of what's happening at DC Comics and how much success they're having with the Justice League.
Who is in the original Justice League?
The first issue, so I believe they appeared in a comic called Brave and the Bold, was when they debuted, and it was Green Lantern,
Superman,
Green Lantern, Aquaman, Flash, Martian Manhunter, and Wonder Woman.
So no Superman.
Superman and Batman are there. They're actually included in the first comic, I believe, but they're not on the cover.
Martian what?
Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
Martian Manhunter.
Martian Manhunter, man.
He was from another planet,
Yes,
from Mars,
he's from
and
Mars.
he hunted men.
Yes.
that illegal?
Is pretty much
And what was the last one?
Wonder Woman.
Wonder
was-
Woman. Okay.
Was the female character.
Excellent.
I think they actually retroactively changed the continuity and made that Black Canary later, but I believe in that
Hawk Girl?
first one,
Didn't they do
Hawk Girl?
Yeah, Hawk Girl.
Hawk Girl would eventually Hawk Woman would eventually be
Is
in
it
the
Hawk Woman? What determined if you were girl, woman, man, or boy?
breast size.
Okay.
Who was the leader of the original Justice League?
I don't
That's
know if
gotta
they
be
had a leader.
Superman.
I think you probably lean into Superman. Then.
I mean,
Sure.
it's got to be Superman.
But Superman, he was just kind of there in the background at the time.
He formed the
This was
league.
kind of like a little bit of a Knights of the
He's
Round
like-
Table type thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to know who they fought in the first issue?
Who'd they
of the
fight in the
Justice
first
League?
issue?
Did you see the Suicide Squad movie that James Gunn did?
Yeah.
The giant starfish guy.
Yeah.
Starro the Conqueror was the first villain in the Justice League.
Wow, what a callback.
And was it
Good for them.
the same kind of concept they would attach to people's
Yep.
heads and control them?
Fantastic. All right. So who was the most powerful amongst that generation? I mean, like people had to have had these discussions, or was that up in the air up for debate?
I think, as you get into Superman from the 60s. So when we talk about Superman in the 40s having very limited powers, that changes in the 60s.
Okay,
So now we
gotcha.
start to get to the point where
Superman does everything.
every crisis that Superman is in, they're going to load some new superpower in him. So he's got super ventriloquism. He's got super hypnotism.
Right.
So I think you could argue that because of the nature of the way they treated the character, easily the most powerful person in the Justice League. You could possibly make an argument that Martian Manhunter is right on par with him.
Okay. All right. So what was Martian Manhunter able to do?
He's a shapeshifter.
Shapeshifter. very good.
So he's very
Yep.
strong. He's got that same level of invulnerability that Superman has. He can read minds, which is
Oh, so he's
fantastic.
bulimic.
The one challenge that Martian Manhunter has is his nemesis is fire. So
that's easier to come
Fire
by
stymie.
than
So I got an
kryptonite.
interesting. So I pulled this up. All right. So in the 1940s, right? So his powers were super strength, flight, super speed, invulnerability, vision, hearing, super breath, and mental powers, super ventriloquism, super hypnotism, stamina, healing factor, and then some others. And then later on, he gets power reduction, tactile telekinesis, fortified blood. Modern era, he has regenerative healing factor, power reduction. They nerf heroes actually. So I'm seeing this here. As the generations go around, they add powers, but they actually nerf the heroes a little bit too, and say, well, they're actually weak to this now too, or to give a sense of, I guess, risk.
from a dramatic standpoint, if you have a superhero that literally cannot be harmed, it takes a lot of the interest out of the story.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah,
My dad. Oh my God! I just remembered. My dad was a Superman fan when he was a little boy. So this would have been 1960 or like in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, that was prime Superman time. That was, Batman was the Batman show during that 60s. I think the Adam West.
Yeah.
Was going strong. Dude, I think DC was super strong during that period of time where it's just
Right.
yeah, but Superman was always had that I don't know. Like from its inception to now, it always seemed like Superman was just like, yeah, that's the hero.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, my dad wasn't just a fan. He was a big fan of Superman, but him being the analytical guy that he always has been and everything, even as a young man, he wrote a letter to DC basically saying, like, why if there's so much crime, and everything in why doesn't Superman just go and solve all of it? Yeah, he was like legitimately wondering, like, why wouldn't this like perfect being just end all the crime? And they just sent him a letter back and said, like, thanks for reading our comics. We really appreciate you being a fan of the series.
I mean,
he said after that, I stopped reading comics.
Be like, well, things have to happen. People have to. Why doesn't God stop them? I mean,
we could potentially plan, depending on how this podcast series goes, but we could do a Superman focused one at some point. I'll talk about why they limited his abilities in the 80s. There was a series of that. But
I mean, you would have to, though, like, to have some form of risk.
Tension. Yeah.
The idea of a superhero is that they are protecting people, but you have to have a risk. If there's no risk, then what's the point? Like, it's
Sure.
In the 60s comics, the way they introduced drama into Superman was kryptonite and different forms of kryptonite. So green kryptonite would weaken him. Red kryptonite would turn him evil. Purple kryptonite would do something different. So there was all these different forms of kryptonite that added a layer of drama to the story.
So is the 60s kind of like when they started introducing the possibility of defeat kind of thing? Like, is that...
That's not until the 90s,
yeah,
I think.
not really.
Okay.
Because that's when Superman dies.
Yeah, comics are pretty silly in the 60s.
Okay. All right.
But, like, they did get really into colors because, like, Green Lantern's all about colors, too. There's a yellow lantern, there's purple, there's red. Like, they have all
Was this all 60s stuff, too?
Yeah.
No?
Is it Green Lantern?
No.
What was that?
Green Lantern is 60s, but the introduction of all the other color cores is actually fairly recent.
Oh,
dang,
okay.
son.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
The popularity of the Power Rangers, they had to,
Yeah.
Hey, man, Red Ranger all the way.
So anyway,
because we kind of had that, Power Rangers was, the
Super
softened, superheroes of the '60s kind of thing.
It's easier to associate something to a color than it is to to like the actual person.
Sure.
Like, to me, whenever I hear green, it does invoke things. I'm thinking of Green Lantern. I think of like Green Arrow. I think of like Joker with green. Like the color itself invokes things for comics for me.
Okay.
So colors are so important to comics and how they're used.
Martin Goodman's on the golf course, and he hears about this Justice League and how much success DC is having with this, and he decides, I want to reinvest in a superhero book. And because Atlas has so many different publishing lines that they're doing,
Sure.
he decides, we're going to release this new superhero book, and it's going to be under a new publishing imprint that we're going to call Marvel Comics.
Marvel
So that's the start of Marvel Comics.
All right, so we have the origin of Marvel Comics.
But they have Marvel Boy before Marvel Comics.
Yes.
Now, was that inspiration for the name?
Maybe, but I'll even go so far as to say there's another publishing company back in the 40s that had Captain Marvel. So that further complicates things.
All right.
No relation, though.
No relation.
Okay.
No relation.
That's-
So what's this word Marvel come from then? Like,
It's marvelous.
Well, yeah, I've heard the word
yeah.
marvelous like a bunch of times in my life, but like as a marvel itself, I mean, that must have been something in the vernacular.
I think it's just, I guess, a general sense of wonderment or amazement. I don't know. You marvel at something.
Wonderment.
So Goodman goes back to the
they
office.
didn't want to go with wonderment. Wonderment would have been.
Wonder
We
Man.
tried Wonder Man, and is that a super?
There is a Wonder Man. Yes.
Of
So
course there is.
Goodman goes back to the offices and he pulls aside his head writer, his main editor, and says, "I want a superhero book." And that writer is Stan Lee.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
All
There
right.
you go.
Stan Lee decides he wants to do something different. He doesn't want to revamp some of the old Timely or Atlas concepts. And he goes through and he reads some of the DC comics of the era and decides he doesn't like it. He wants to go in a different direction. So he decides that while the DC heroes are all these paragons of virtue and could do no wrong, and you see nothing but nobility in them, he wants to write a more realistic comic. He wants people to have flaws and to have characterization.
Okay.
And in November of 1961, Stanley and Jack Kirby released their first issue of Fantastic Four #1.
Fantastic Four #1.
And it is an immediate success.
Okay.
It's blowing everything that DC is doing out of the water.
Okay.
Is this the first comic to introduce like 4 new heroes in one comic?
Oh, yeah.
Ryan, that's a great question. I think it is. I think,
Wow.
yeah.
Because I mean, did you say the Human Torch was before?
The Human Torch in the 40s is not the Human Torch of the
Okay,
Fantastic Four.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
It's so the first time, and that's probably why, man. I mean, like, think about it. Like, it's like, oh, this game now comes with like all of these.
Right,
You know, it's
okay.
like a fully loaded comic now that gives you 4 different superheroes, all with different unique powers.
All different powers and flawed. So you had superheroes that complained about their daily life and struggled. Ben Grimm, the Thing, had to deal with people judging him based on his appearance.
Sure.
The characters had personality. It was sharp. And when you look at
And he had to star in the Shield too. I mean, that
when
was
you
a
look at
whole
the
thing.
efforts of DC at the time compared to Fantastic Four, they're on a different level.
Whatever,
So
Flame
whatever.
too.
so it's a massive hit. And within a year, again, we're looking at Atlas. Atlas has those restrictions of how many titles they can publish. They're only doing 5 titles each month. Most of those being anthology titles where they're doing several different stories per book.
Okay.
And then Fantastic Four is a runaway hit. So what they start doing is they start looking at other superhero concepts. And Lee has this bullpen of artists. He's got Jack Kirby, he's got Steve Ditko, all guys that have a very similar style. And so he kind of orchestrates the idea of there being a Marvel look. And so all these books not only are exciting, but they lock in together. They're connected.
Okay.
So I mean, but what do you mean by a look? Like, I mean, is it artistic styling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there like a different like character outlining or stuff like that Marvel does that DC was not doing, or like? I mean, because like I've seen these old comics and I mean, obviously a lot of them mesh the same to me. It's hard for me to kind of like be like, oh, that has a different style. They were all
even as a comic fan, somebody that really likes comics and really likes comics of this era, the Silver Age, I can look at some Marvel comics and go, who's the artist on this one? There's a lot of similarity. There's a lot of people that draw very close to each other.
People were reluctant to like have their own, like as an artist, their own kind of
Style.
flair on
Yeah.
it because it needed to be uniform.
Ditko was a little different. Steve Ditko was the artist for Doctor Strange.
Ooh,
okay.
And his style, he was also the early artist for Spider-Man. His style was a little weirder, a little bit more abstract. But if you were an artist and you kind of drew in the Jack Kirby style, that's when you look at Marvel through the 60s, it's his style. That's kind of what people followed.
Okay.
So after the success of Fantastic Four, Marvel had a book called Tales to Astonish, and in Tales to Astonish in 1962, they introduced Ant-Man. They followed that up with Amazing Fantasy.
I mean, have they released? Did they release other things in this time as well that just maybe fell by the wayside? I mean, where they were out ideas all over the place.
Not superheroes, really. Like Marvel, as they came out with superheroes, it was one hit after another.
Okay.
They definitely had.
And during this period of time, was DC like just kind of trying to counteract everything that Marvel was putting? Like, if Marvel's like, I'm gonna put Firework Man out, they're gonna go, well, I'm gonna put out the 4th of
Jubilee.
July, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily. That comes later.
I mean, like, but like, yeah. So right now? There's not a rivalry that has formed because has Marvel gained, or actually, has Marvel surpassed DC in notoriety at this point, or
in terms of acclaim, Fantastic Four is a massive hit.
And
But when you look at dominance in the publishing industry, it's still DC.
It's still DC. So
DC
DC
has
probably
way more
was
titles
like,
out there.
look, they're doing well, but we don't even need to worry about
Yeah.
them. We got Superman, we got Batman, we got this
Exactly.
Justice League.
Okay.
We're set.
So we see Ant-Man come out, we see Spider-Man come out, we see Thor come out through Journey into Mystery.
All right.
And then Lee and Kirby follow up their success in Fantastic Four by releasing the Hulk in his own book.
Okay.
So the Hulk comes from Fantastic Four, or did any of these people make an appearance originally on another comic and then get their own spinoff, like during this period of time? Because I thought that's like typically how it would happen. Is like, oh, we are introducing this character, introducing the Incredible Hulk. And the Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk, and just like that with a voice.
No, because
And-
they could use the anthology series to pretty much release anything. If they had a character that they were interested in, they know it's only going to take up 8 out of 24 pages And if it's not a hit, if people don't immediately resonate with it, well, you just don't publish him in the next one. You go on to something else.
Sure.
So
I'd just be interested to hear like their pitch meetings on these heroes and like just be like, all right, what do we want? We want someone who turns small. What is small? Well, ants are small. All right, then how does he become an ant? Science.
well, you talk about pitch
It's
meetings.
all
Yeah.
science.
You talk about pitch meetings. That's where things are kind of interesting for Marvel at this time because there's really one writer. Stan Lee is writing all of these. He's coming up with all these characters. He's writing all of the stories on a monthly basis.
Did he ever talk about like what his inspirations were, like where he came up with all this crap? from?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
like
yeah. And we can
it'd
focus
be
on that.
worth-
Excelsior.
Yeah, be worth looking into that. But
No, I mean,
think.
I'm sure that he had to have been a big fan of like older like style comics, but also like sci-fi and like that kind of bringing up of like understand because I mean that was like he grew up on that kind of stuff and he as a kid probably got picked on or understood like what it was like to be I don't know human in this world. So it's like okay, how do I introduce a human element into my writing for heroes?
And you know, before his death, he's been interviewed countless times over how he came up with the idea for these characters. And I don't know if all of that is verbatim or if some of that is reflecting back on how they did initially.
Sure.
But you know, he wanted Spider-Man to be a nerdy teen with
Right.
typical nerdy teen problems, and he also had superpowers.
Right,
You know, he
right.
wanted Hulk to be just
A
this
nerdy
raw,
scientist.
this raw power and emotion,
Yeah.
and out of control.
Okay,
But
all right,
like
all
a
right,
lot
all
of them, like yeah, but if you notice, like, yeah, the trend is they were all like none of them were like super popular people, and then they got the superpowers. They were like underdogs.
Sure.
And that's kind of like the idea is like they go in with these. Oh man, this person's just I can relate. I was a nerd in high school. Okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I can get bitten by a radioactive spider and become a Spider-Man.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
Yep. So by 1963, Spider-Man's hugely popular. He's breaking out just as much as Fantastic Four is. In Tales of Suspense, they introduce Iron Man.
Oh.
In Strange Tales, they introduce Doctor Strange. And it's starting to get to the point where Marvel's competing with DC. Their titles are
So
getting
at this
better.
point
mid-sixties.
now DC's like, ugh.
So
All right,
the company
a little
that's
too large.
National Periodicals that's handling the distribution tells Marvel, we're going to go ahead and up your titles. We're going to give you now somewhere between 10 and 14 a month. So
wow. Okay.
they start to get a little bit more fast and loose on what they can come out with. Marvel took advantage of this. They figured out this is when they were publishing bi-monthly titles. So I think Fantastic Four was monthly. Spider-Man might have been monthly. But you'd see Tales to Astonish one month and then maybe Strange Tales the next,
Okay,
and vice
gotcha.
versa. So
All right.
you'd see more and more characters being introduced. Marvel decided at some point, the Hulk's individual book was doing okay, but not great, so they shifted him into an anthology title. But they also had overwhelming fan requests saying, can we get a book where some of these characters are together?
So, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, "Hey, man, DC did this.
They did the
Like,
Justice
They
League.
did
Why
the
can't
Justice
you
League.
do
Why can't we? Let's get our Marvel characters in here."
Exactly. So in 1963, Lee made the decision to connect Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and the Wasp by putting them in a new book called The Avengers.
Okay, that's new to me. I've never heard that before.
Now,
The
is
Avengers?
that pronounced Avengers?
The
Yeah, no. that-
Avengers, 1963. I'll
So,
be
like,
damned.
Yeah.
Ant-Man and the Wasp were part of the original Avengers.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little because like I like how we kind of go with our different takes on things for like the MCU and how they wanted to form their Avengers because that's you had in the MCU at the very least it was Captain America was one of the first Avengers, and then you have Hulk and
And they seem to be doing
Hawkeye.
decidedly like weirder things, with
Yeah.
their comics
Yeah.
than DC is. DC's, like,
Very straight and narrow.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the record, Avengers, I think it's Avengers number 4. They bring Captain America out of the ice, bring him out of the 40s, and bring him into the modern era.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that's
Okay.
So they actually tie in the fact that like he was a 40s comic hero. He was very popular during that period of time, and then there wasn't really much with him, and so they iced him and they literally unthaw him to come back out.
Well, it worked
Yes.
for Futurama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a good show too.
Fry wasn't very popular back in the 20th century.
He was not, and he's still not popular in the.
So September 63, that's when we first see the Avengers. And literally a month later, more like the end of that month, Lee and Kirby, again, the team that came out with Fantastic Four, the team that came out with the Hulk, They decide they're going to do another team book.
Okay.
They want to put something else together. They've already assembled all of the best heroes that Marvel has to offer, so they want to start something else from the ground up. And Lee decides he wants to go in a different direction. Kind of, you were talking about superhero origins earlier, where you had, it's either an armor they built or they fell in radioactive waste or some sort of sci-fi accident caused it. He said he wanted to have a team of people that were just born different. They were born with
I know where this is
to be
going.
mutants.
Yes. His pitch to his publisher was that he was going to have a new book called The Mutants.
Okay.
Oh, man.
And they hated that name.
Okay.
And so he changed it up and decided because they were people that had something a little bit extra, he was going to call them the X-Men.
Y-Men.
Oh.
The X-Men.
So
Sorry.
Professor X came after the extra.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
And guys, X-Men is where we're going to start our comics journey. We're going to do some deep exploration of
Man,
X-Men.
I am learning so much on this journey that you're taking us in this comic world,
Oh, yeah,
man.
no.
I mean, like, it is wild to think how far they have come in that period of time, and like even with restrictions, like they did, like again, like the parallels that we have with the video game industry, like they shut down a lot of things because there was talk about how that was influencing youth and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. Like all of this kind of has the same trajectory and the same pattern and structure, but they break through and they're able to like find a ground that works, and then they supersede that.
Yeah.
So like it's
Super
super hot. Yeah.
because they're super powers.
Super powers. What we didn't really go. I mean, like, what do you guys like? What is your favorite superpower?
Oh, jeez.
I got mine.
I go back to invisibility all the time.
Invisibility?
I don't fucking know why, but I just do. Yeah.
I mean, like, that's good. Hollow Man was a great movie.
Hey, that's a throwback.
Hey, check out the Leetist Podcast to know more about Hollow Man.
I've always been a fan of invulnerability. I think that's a nice one where you can't be hurt.
invulnerability.
But flight is also a big
Flight is
Yeah,
flight
pretty
is
dope.
solid, but like I'm always curious about like if you're flying, you don't have any skin that's protecting you from the actual cold of being up
True.
in the air, stuff like that. Like Superman was invulnerable, so that's why he couldn't really do that. If you're just like flying, it reminds me of there's a YouTube sketch where these people could pay for a superpower and they get a choice of Wolverine's powers, but it has to be either super healing or adamantium claws, and they choose the claws.
Oh, no.
Well, they end up. The scene later is them bleeding out because they can't heal back. They cannot heal back, and I mean, and plus, adamantium claws weren't a superpower.
I have to imagine Wolverine was not a part of the original X-Men, right?
You're going to have to find out on the next episode of
Comic ReLeet.